Now we come to our main dish, if I may say so, and this is our keynote, and the keynote on the topic Science in Transition is going to be delivered by Professor Frank MIEDEMA, Professor of Open Science from the University of Utrecht. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I thought it was a starter and not a main course, but anyhow. Let's see. What I did today, I think many of you have already seen me giving this type of talks, and they know I find it extremely difficult to stay within 20 minutes. But I will try, because there will be a panel discussion. So what I will do, I will very quickly go over what, in fact, the previous speaker has been mentioning on recognition and rewards, that we could spend 5 hours discussing recognition and rewards, how difficult it is in Estonia, even in Utrecht and whatever. We're not going to do it. Because the issue will be especially on data and integrity and ethics, so we will stay to that. So I promise I will finish within 20 minutes, and I will try in the end give some, say, dilemmas and issues that are in the transition to open science are there, and we have to we have to discuss. And that's not my specialty has been recognition and rewards. When I came into this field, we decided that there were a lot of very nice researchers who were publishing rubbish. Why? Because they needed to survive. They had a mortgage, the kids needed tennis rackets, they had to go to school, etc., etc. Even in the north of England and Finland. And so, and these people, they were sort of disciplined in the Foucauldian way. They were disciplined and trained to behave. Just publish your papers, Frank, and you will become a professor. And indeed. But after some time you think, who ever read my papers on leukemia? No, none of my papers were ever read, but I had a very nice thesis. Can you believe it? He can believe it because he's smiling. And so this is the discussion, okay? So I will start my presentation and give an overview, and then we will dive into some dilemmas, and then we can have the panel discussion very easily on. So transition to open science, why and how. It's very important always to say why. And what the commissioner didn't do, and I will going to say, the real thing why we do the transition to open science is to have more impact on society. Not science for science, but this is science for society. And I started my studies in 1971, so I'm a child of the 60s, and that was public engagement all over. Public engagement. And that was really engagement. And that was really, say, there was a problem in society and we tried to solve it by science. Later on, we published papers that nobody was asking for. And you can read my book, and you can see me also on the internet giving presentations to gay people in the Amsterdam cohort. And I presented the science paper, and one of those people went to the microphone and he said, I think you make a nice career with our lymphocytes and cells and our information from the cohort. But I have a question. My friend is seropositive and I'm seropositive. If we have sex, should we use condoms? And I was looking like most of you now are looking. Like, huh? That's a real question for people really struggling with HIV infection. And that should, of course, be discussed also in science. And we did a lot of research on that later on. But these type of questions, they didn't come from the lab. They came from society, from people who are stakeholders. Okay, everybody warmed up now. This is a slide I use also always from Katja Meijer. I was in a big European project with Katja Meijer and Sabina Leonelli. Her name will also feature later on. And we were discussing what was open science all about. All these issues that we have discussed you can find in my book and also on the internet. And of course, for this session today, it's very important that it is especially the relationship with society. So are we really catering to society? Are we producing are you working for a career or for a cure? That's very important. So I'm from Biomed. And this is very important. And of course, the other problem was privatization, everything behind paywalls, etc., etc. You can find this all in other presentations. I will repeat the promise that the commissioner made, the promise of open science. And the promise is very clear. And this is the why. The why is very important. Why are we doing this, Frank? Why are we just not doing the old game? Well, it's very important that we want to have, and this is what the commissioner said, equality, more societal impact, real contributions to real problems, working on the right problems, And who's deciding that? I will come back to that. Very, very important. So on this slide, this is the real portée. And of course, you need to engage. So if you work with what I did with HIV-infected AIDS patients, then you talk to these patients. You ask. You try to reflect on who am I, who are these people, etc., etc. This is one of the most important slides in this whole presentation. This is what's all about. And therefore, of course, you need other things. But this is very important. Define problems to be investigated, discuss. This is co-creation, etc., etc. And of course, I was not raised on co-creation. I was raised on producing papers. But because I was working in the blood transfusion service and in Amsterdam, and we were dealing with homosexual people, gay people in a cohort, with Joep Lange, Goudsmit and Coutinho and my friends, we were discussing with these people. We showed them our results, and they talked back to us. And they asked questions, like the one I just gave you as an example. And that helped us define the real problems. And also, together with them, study if our results could be, say, used in practice, also in the context where the stakeholder is. This is extremely important to get the why. This is the why. The why. Open science is really about relating to society. Of course, that's very important. And of course, actively promoting, etc. The next slide is, of course, if you do this, then you have to also share your results, if possible, in several stages of the work. It was also mentioned by the previous speaker. And of course, most people know that. Most people say open science, oh yeah, that's open access publishing. Open access publishing, open data, these are enablers that help scientists, universities, institutes, knowledge producers to go for the real questions and to do better research and to also share their research with the people that they are working for, with the stakeholders in society. Very, very important. And we'll come back to that. So open data and open code software, of course, that's an enabler. It is something that you should do if you want to really do open science with respect to the previous slide. And of course, I already made it involved here in the very important for this discussion today, fair and open data if possible, but closed if necessary. And we are not fools. We know what happens when we share data and what happens and the inequality. I will come back to that in the end. So this is open and fair if possible, closed if necessary. Of course, now with geopolitics, I will come back to that later on. This is very important. So again, this is how I rephrase the European Open Science Agenda in 2016. I was closely involved in these days and spent a lot of time in European projects. And here you see what's going on. So I put on the top citizen science and public engagement, societal impact. I put it on the top. And then, of course, you have to do open access, fair data, European Open Science Cloud. You have to work on your research integrity, skills in education. And then, of course, you have to facilitate your researchers in your institutes, but also funders they are, of course, very, very important because they have the money. They also should rethink their rewards and incentives and also how they evaluate science. And also the European Union is a big funder. You just mentioned it. And they also have to think about, okay, how do we reward and how do we incentivize that scientists who get our grants and our money do the right thing according to the Open Science Agenda. Very important. Is it easy? No, that is very difficult. Because I am now 70, and I was completely trained in the old fashion. In the 80s and the 90s, and in the first decade of the century, we were raised on nature, science, and cell. I'm a chemist. I was raised on nature, science, and cell papers. Frank, if you have one more nature paper, I think we can go and see whether you can become a professor. That's how I reacted. I'm so relaxed now, you can see. But I was really a tough competitor, and oh my God. And this is not a joke. We go back. Can we go on? Oh. The system refuses me. I think they already heard me. Can we go? Can we advance one? Did I do something wrong? Can you do it? Strange.
Not really.
I see something different.
Look.
Yeah. It moves. It moved. Yeah, thank you. So this is the program. This is the program that we have developed in Utrecht. But this is also the program that was also written out in Europe in 2016 already. This is our program. You can find it on the internet, this infographics and more infographics. This is the scheme. So if you want to go from science and society and to working together better, the pointer, I forget about the pointer. So you see, you go from the left to the right, you see that working together towards a better world, that's what we want to do. And therefore you need...
Now you have to go.
Yeah. Therefore you need a lot of, say, changes, and they are all in the circle. And they have been mentioned already by me, and also they will be mentioned in the discussion later on in the panel. Of course, also open education, very, very important. And therefore, of course, you have to have open access, you have to have fair data and open software. You have to change your recognition and rewards to have better public engagement. This is what's all, and you needed to do it all. So people said to me, Frank, we do open access already, so do we also have to teach people to do better public engagement? And I say, that's what it's all about. So why, the why, very important. Okay. And this you see also, this is the website from University Utrecht. You can go to the University Utrecht website, Open Science. You see we have these programs. And we followed very closely, and we are very proud of that, we followed the European initiative from 2016. So I became the chair of the Utrecht University program in 2019, after I served for a long time on the board of the medical center. And this is how we are firing up the whole university. And I can tell you, you need a lot of energy. You need to put a lot of energy in explaining why and how, etc. Okay, so for this session, I think it's very important that we should discuss changing a reward and incentives. I'm not going to dwell on that. You can imagine that's very, very difficult. People were raised on producing a specific product. Their mentors say, well, if you just produce papers, then you will be all right. And Frank MIEDEMA, he will not be the dean forever, so then we go back to normal again. Did you ever hear that at home? Did you hear it at home? Yeah, it's nice, but eventually we will go back to normal because everybody in Europe, of course, the committees, they will just count our papers. And of course, they lie about it, etc., etc. And this is live on television, oh my God. And so, of course, we all know this. This is changing a culture. Of course, there's counterculture, etc., etc. And I was raised on it. So I was on committees that people said, are we going to discuss this individual and this project? Because I don't see any nature or science papers. And it was wonderful science, but not according to those old criteria. Now we have new criteria. You all know COARA, of course. Very important. Okay, but here you look at fair and open data if possible, but closed if necessary. Let's focus on that. And we should not be naive. Some people said to me, although I find that very difficult to believe, that he thought I was naive. I'm not naive. But of course we have to think, if you share data, if I produce data, if I have a very strong research group, and we had collaborations in Ethiopia, in South America, and in Africa, and if we are, say, using the data that we see in Ethiopia, and we take it to Amsterdam, and we do wonderful research, we have more money, we have better labs, we have more skilled people, etc., so we have more opportunity, so it's not fair. So we have to think about it. And of course, this is very, very, very real. So the whole idea about open access, from the South American perspective, people say, be careful, because we have already these formats for diamond publishing, open access, and we don't need those APCs that you come up with, etc. So we have to think very, very globally, very inclusively with respect to the country and the different countries that are there. And again, I will in the end say, science is not science. Science is very different in Egypt, in Hungary, from Holland, from the Germans, and from France, and even Italy and Spain. If you study those systems, they are completely different. The reward system is different. The way you make how people are, say, becoming part of the communities, etc., etc. So this is very important. I will point out to Sabina Leonelli's book, which was recently published. It's a small book. It's only 100 pages, but she describes all these issues, these dilemmas, the inequalities, sharing the data, how can you do that? And of course, what she also says, and that's very important, science is very different. So if you're a chemist, the way you do science, the way you produce data, what type of data and what type of results you can get is completely different from biology, but also from the social sciences, of course. And so you have to really think, okay, what type of science is going on here? How are these? What is the mores? How are they discussing quality? How are they assessing quality? And what are they thinking about if they talk about, say, things like results. What counts as a result? Is a paper a result, or is a change in the way we treat a specific patient group a result? Which is not a paper, but is, of course, very important for the patient group and, of course, also for public health in the country, etc., etc. Very, very important. So science has a multitude of phases, forms, applications, contexts, and ways of doing, practices. And that should not. So will not be one, say, way to do open science. If that will be the idea of the panel, we can go after my talk and go for a beer. Then it starts there. It starts like, how can you think about in an academia, in an academic system, in an institution like a university, how can you realize that there, and how can you facilitate all these different ways to do open science? Because all these sciences are different. Okay. Now I will just mention a specific type of problems for you, which will also come, I have 5 minutes left, which will also be, in the panel. I think we have to, of course, it was mentioned, open science goes for inclusivity, diversity, impact on society, co-creation, sharing knowledge, and of course, working according to the SDGs, etc., etc. All nice. And I think we already agree that it has to be done. So in science in these days, in many countries, is not organized according to these principles, mind you. So there's a lot of work to be done. And of course, recognition and rewards, very important. We're not going to talk about that anymore. We're going to talk about the other things. Okay, then you think, of course, is open, sharing your data. Sharing data, of course, and people say, well, you have a very nice idea. You think I will use specific enzymes, I will use specific, formulas, and I will try to find a new, vaccine, like what the people have been done with the mRNA vaccines. If people say it would be very important to also publish in an open access form your idea for the project, then you already mentioned it. Then people say, and I was raised on it. Are you crazy? Somebody else will steal it and will run away. They will also start to work on it. I went to many meetings when I was, later on in the 80s, that at conferences, at large meetings, people never showed data that was not already in print. If you show data that was not already in print, people would, I will not say, people would using their cameras, and they send it home, and they said to their postdocs, work on this, this is interesting, and later on, of course, you found out that somebody stole your, etc., etc. But if we realize that having that idea is already a product and can already be, in your reward system recognized, then you're in a different game. But people say, no, we only count papers. So you see, everything is related to how are we, rewarding and incentivizing academics in all type of ways. This is very important. Okay, and of course it's totally different for sciences and the social sciences and humanities, natural sciences, social, and of course technical. And so we're working a lot with the technical university in Eindhoven. And of course, when I started this discussion, I said you don't have this problem because you are designing new machines, and that's not a paper. That's something that is tangible. A new machine, you can put it on the table. You can also put prototypes on the table. You can also show that it works. And of course, you can write about it, you can write a paper about it, but the paper is not very relevant. The machine is relevant, okay? So very different ideas about reuse, abuse, etc., etc. And also, where do you get your credits? If you have very nice data and you publish your data with your ORCID, with your identifier, people can always say, oh, I used the data of that group, for instance, your group, and we added something, or we had another analysis. But then, of course, you can say, people can see, and also your boss can see, his data was used to the advantage of the field and, of course, society. And it helps you to become a professor, I hope, in Eindhoven.
Well, I am already, so.
You know what I mean?
I know what you mean,
yeah.
right.
Okay. And of course, abuse. The discussion about geopolitics, abuse, a big item. Of course, when I was young, we still had a discussion, but can be discussed with scientists from the other side of the Cold War, behind the Iron Curtain, etc. These discussions are coming back. And we have to be clear about it. And of course, this is very important. I will say something about that later on. Okay. What's very important is also ownership. If you are working in a university, who is the owner? According to how I was raised and what is practiced in Holland, because we are all private university, we are not private, we are public. The university has the rights, and of course you can make a deal. If something comes out of it, they can say reward you. But in principle, they were paying your salary, etc., etc. So these discussions, of course, are also related to the discussions about how are you if you are doing open science. What does that mean? That the university should also realize they may be sort of the owner, but they also make it open, etc., etc. These discussions will come back, I guess. Okay, of course, the other thing, of course, is, and this is the discussion about neutrality, who is neutral, and of course academic freedom. You mentioned it already before we started, academic freedom. Academic freedom, yes, but there's also responsibilities. Scientists also have responsibilities. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with responsibilities? So if you go back to the early days of the Vietnam War, there was a lot of discussion in the American universities about, so can a university be against the war or not? Same discussions now with the conflict in the Middle East, of course. And so can the university take a position, yes or no? Can researchers take a position based on science? Based on their scientific convictions and in a scientific debate. These things are also related to open science. Because you're opening up to society, your scientists are, of course, involved in the public debates. And we have big discussions also in our country about that, you're probably aware, and people don't agree. But there's different opinions. Some people don't want to be involved, other people want to be involved, but always on the basis of science. And if you have a political say opinion, that's something different. But as a scientist, you can have your opinions about, say, use of specific weapons or whatever. Okay, these discussions will probably come back. But I will say again, finally, and I'm nearly done. I will say again, science, academic freedom, yes, but there's also academic responsibilities. Think about it. Okay, and then of course, again. Interactions with stakeholders. Open science, I will say, we are opening up science. Of course, we're not naive. So with whom do we collaborate? Who makes the decisions? Who sets the agenda for collaborations? Is that the rector? Is it the vice chancellor, they would say, in another country? Is it the president of the university? Is it the national academy? Who is deciding what type of engagements we can go on? Also a big discussion for this panel, I guess. And something that, of course, needs a lot of attention. And, of course, for different fields of science, different disciplines, there can be different ideas, but they should be thought through, and we should be, aware of these issues. And it helps a lot of researchers. And again, my final statement, Mr. Chairman, my final statement is, you have to keep in mind that in universities, in academia, there are different levels of research ethics, integrity. There's the board of the university. There's the board of the funders. There's the departments, larger institutions. And then there's the researchers. There are different levels of, say, integrity. And again, in this type of discussions, we have to involve the leadership of the universities and the leadership of the funders. Because they have the power. Somebody who wants to make a career in science, who wants to do a PhD, who wants to become a professor, congratulations. Who wants to become a professor, he or she will play the game eventually, because how can you survive? And so these people and these researchers and these colleagues should be facilitated in the proper way. And that is, of course, the big, say, elephant here on the table in the room. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that at the very basis of this debate and the points you raised boils down to the question that, well, how to what extent do we see scientific research and knowledge and scientific progress as a public good? And from that perspective, my point of view is that we still have some of those cooperation and trust problems that people are just thinking about themselves and not giving the information to the public, because the system is built like that. This is not just about, well, individual decisions, but about how do we organize the institutions. And I hope that probably the next convocation of the European Parliament, which is going to plan for the next framework program, whether it's called Horizon or not, has to take into account all those issues you just raised. This is about the IP rights of scientific research. This is about the reuse of data and so on and so forth. Also, of course, the geopolitical challenges that have already appeared on the political agenda.